Hello and welcome to PCS Electronics Test Bench. Today on the bench I have a Xantrex SW3012, and this unit came to me for repair because they said that they could get no output from the inverter. And when I put it on the bench to test it, initially I couldn't get it to turn on, and I went into the menu system to figure out why. And I did find out, things were not set right. And once I had everything set right, I powered it up and it ran just fine. And I could not find an issue with it. So at this point, after talking to the customer that sent me this unit, I determined that they simply had the menu settings incorrect, and that led to them not being able to turn this unit on. So I thought I'd make a video to show how you turn this unit on and off, because it's definitely a little convoluted, much harder than it should be. So what I've got here is just the inverter hooked up to a low power battery source just so I can turn it on and off. And I've got a voltmeter hooked to the output over here on the side to one of the outputs, watching the AC. And at the moment, even though I have this remote ready to go here, it's not plugged in. And this is how they had it. They did not have the remote on the test bench that they were testing it on. The owner had the remote, but I suspect that he had it set wrong and he couldn't get it turned on. So then they brought it into the test bench and they couldn't get it turned on, but they didn't use the remote. So without the remote, let's try it. Let's see if we can just turn this unit on. So we're going to switch on the power. And you'll notice it goes through a test. The lights come up. You hear the fans spin up. Okay, at this point it has power, but it's not turned on. You hit this button on the front. You got a green light, but yet you have no voltage. And you wonder, well, what's going on? I turned it on, but yet no voltage coming out. Well, if you notice, number one, look at what the button is labeled. Inverter enable. So you've enabled it, but you haven't turned it on. There actually is no on-off button here. So they thought it was broken and sent it to me. I'm going to show you why it's not broke. So what we need to do is go ahead and connect the remote. That's the terminator for the Xan bus. And then here's the actual cable for the remote. And then the remote will come up. Okay, so here we are at the system status screen. And interestingly enough, you have this button here, which we could also try to turn this thing on now that we've got it plugged in. So we know the one in the front didn't do anything. Let's try this one. Can we turn the unit on? You'll know it's on from two things. You'll see voltage here, and then you'll see this inverter light come on if it comes on. So if I poke this button, nope, doesn't come on. If I push it and hold it, nope, doesn't come on. So this button doesn't turn it on, even though it says on. It doesn't turn the unit on. If you look closely, you have what they call ENINV. That's the inverter enable. Okay, and the inverter enable, if you push it, doesn't turn on, is switched to disable inverter. So that doesn't turn on. Okay, so we still can't get it to turn on. You have to go into the menu. Down here it says menu. Push enter. It's pointing to the button below that. So you push that, button, that brings you to this menu of items that you need to go down to your inverter. This is an SW3012 inverter. You enter. Now we have to go down to where it says inverter, and you see it says it's disabled. And that's one of your problems. So you hit enter, you enable it, enter. Okay, now it's enabled, but it's still not on, still no voltage. We have to go down again. Okay, so the one right below inverter is called search mode. And when I received this unit, it was enabled. And if you don't understand what that does, that's going to be problematic, because what that does is if you don't have a load on the unit, you won't get any voltage out of it, because it's looking for a load to actually allow the inverter to turn on. And with this enabled, unless I actually put some kind of a load on the output, you won't get any voltage. You'll get something kind of jumping up and down as it searches for a load. So when I received this, this was enabled, and that was one of the problems. So we need to go ahead and disable that for now. It's an energy saving feature that often can cause issues like not being able to turn the unit on, or in some cases if you have light loads like a TV, sometimes the TV won't turn on. Okay, so we've disabled the search mode. Now we need to go down to one more setting, and that is the desired mode. And you notice it's in standby. The unit will not run if you're in standby. So we need to push enter, change that to operating, and push enter. Okay, so now that's in operating mode. We'll go back up. Let's check some other things here. We'll go back up. Oh, for some reason the inverter got disabled. Not sure why. Enter, enable, boom. As soon as I did that, you notice this green light came on, and now we have 120 volts coming out. So literally, to make this thing work with no load, just sitting on the test bench, you have to be sure that your inverter is enabled, your search mode is disabled, and that your desired mode is in the operating setting. So once you have all those set, you can back out to your main menu. And in order to turn this unit on and off, the best thing to do is to use this arrow right here, which makes no sense, but I'll show you why. If you look above this arrow right below where it says DSINV, right now my inverter is running, green light's on, have 120 volts out. I can turn it off because it says DSINV, which means disable inverter. I disable it, it goes off, got 0 volts coming out. I can then push the button again because now it says enable inverter. I can push it, inverter comes back on, green light's on, I got 120 volts out. Okay, so this now becomes my on off button. Even though it's not labeled that, it's labeled with an arrow and with disable and enable inverter. If you were to use this button to turn it off, which you would think would be one way you should be able to turn this unit off, it ends up disabling the inverter in the menu. So let's try that. If I push this button until it goes off, okay, inverter has gone off. It would make sense that I should be able to push that button to make the inverter go back on, but it doesn't work. We were using this just a second ago to enable the inverter. Okay, but now that's not working. It won't keep the inverter enabled. So here we go again, back into the menu system. Select the inverter, arrow down. Notice the inverter is now disabled. Again, enter, change it to enable, enter. Now the inverter is back on again. Let's back out. Okay, so now I can control the inverter again with this button. I can turn it off. There we have no volts coming out. I can turn it on. Volts, now it's got 120. But don't use that button, because then it's going to disable the inverter. It's just ridiculous. But that's why this inverter got sent to me, because turning this thing on is just ridiculous. I mean, it's just, who came up with this? I don't know. So it got sent to me just so I could figure out how to turn it on and off. Another interesting point, when I first had this on the bench, I couldn't get this front button to do anything except put it into standby. Now that we have it all set up, I can push it and it'll turn off the inverter. And I can push it and it'll turn on the inverter. So now this button on the front works as an on-off button now that the menus are all set up correctly. And what's interesting is, even if you don't have the remote connected, that will still work. So let's try that. So let's go ahead and turn the power off. Kill the whole thing. Disconnect this. So now this is like I received it without the remote connected. Let's go ahead and turn the power back on. Okay, so now we've got the power back on. We don't have the remote, but we've set it all up. Let's go ahead and turn it on. Inverter comes on, and sure enough, we have 120 volts. I can turn it off, and there it turns off. So now that it's been preset, that front panel button acts as an on-off switch. Okay, so now let's go back to the one feature that we talked about a little bit, and I want to just show you how this can cause a problem. Let's go into the menu system here. Let's go into our inverter and down to this, what they call the search mode. I have it disabled, and I'll show you why. Because with it disabled, I can actually turn on the inverter and get 120 volts out. Okay, let's turn the inverter off again. If I enable that, if I enable the search mode, and then I switch the inverter on, you'll notice I don't get 120 volts. You'll see it jumping once in a while as the meter tries to auto range. I don't know if I can get this out of auto range here. So there we go, now you can see it. And what it does is sends out a little burst of voltage. So there we're down 4 or 5 volts, and then you get a burst up to 110 volts. So it sends out a little blip of voltage. And when it sends out that blip, if it gets current flowing during that little blip of voltage, means something's plugged in, then the inverter will actually switch on. And so that's a power save feature. So if you didn't know that that was enabled and you tried to run this thing on your bench with no load, this is what you're going to see, and you're going to think it's broke. So you have to make sure you go in and disable that feature. Okay, Okay, so now I'm going to do a demonstration of the search mode, how that works. What's interesting is the inverter light on the front of the inverter is on, but the inverter light on the remote is not on, which is kind of ridiculous, because the inverter is actually enabled right now. It is actually running, but it's running in what they call search mode. And what search mode does is it sends out a pulse of voltage looking for a load, which is why they call it search mode. So there's just a couple of volts and it jumps to 100 volts. So you can see that on the meter. And I have not gone into the menu system to find out where, but there will be a place where you can program how many watts it has to find in order for it to turn on. But what's interesting is, let's do a little test here. I have a 40 watt bulb. I'm going to go ahead and connect that. And what you'll notice is 40 watts, apparently on the setting that it's at, is not enough. So the search pulse comes out, the bulb lights up, and then it shuts off saying, nope, I don't see enough load out there, I'm not going to turn on. Let's go ahead and change this bulb to a 100 watt bulb. And there you go. Now we have 119 volts coming out. Nice steady voltage to run our bulb. So that's essentially how the search watts feature works. Take this out. So the problem you can have, as you can see, by the 40 watt bulb blinking on and off, is that if you were trying to just watch your television with the way this thing's set right now, the standby circuit in the television probably would not be enough to get this inverter to turn on. And so you'd have to go either turn that search watts mode off, or we can go into the menu system and see if there's a spot where you can actually program how many watts it's looking for. From the experiment we just did, obviously needs something larger than a 40 watt load for it to stay on. Okay, so I had to ship that inverter back to the customer before I had a chance to finish this video segment. I wanted to find out how to set the search watts value. In other words, how to set the amount of power it would have to see before it came out of search watts and powered up the inverter. And I went through this entire manual that came with this remote. I also went through the manual online, and I could not find any place that allowed you to set that. Doesn't mean it's not there. I couldn't find it. Maybe if someone out there knows where it's at, they can put it in the comments down below. But yeah, so there should be a place you can set that so that when the inverter sees a load, it turns on. But from what I've seen, normally you probably just want to keep that feature off. So that ends this segment on this Xantrex unit, and we'll see you next time.